Good morning, Frauke. I think it's in morning. Yeah, in Düsseldorf. Yeah. Nice to meet you again in our
Nice to see you.
lecture. Okay. And also all participants here, good afternoon. Hopes you are also well this afternoon, and we will be ready to follow Frauke's sharing. Yeah, today's. For you who hasn't known about Frauke or who hasn't joined with her lectures before, yeah, I will introduce a little bit about Frauke. Frauke is our adjunct professor during this semester, this year, and then next year. And she already shared some knowledge regarding the psychosis, yeah, and also besides with the participants or general participants, she also provided training to our staffs, yeah, related to the what is the assessment, how to assess and yeah, how to acknowledge, yeah, early starts of psychosis among adolescents. And then today she will share related to topics related to determinants of mental health and epidemiology of mental disorders, which is one of her expertise. Maybe, yeah, Frauke will explain whether she is still doing some research or things related to determinants of mental health and epidemiology. Yeah. Frauke Schultze-Lutter, am I right to pronounce?
Schultze-Lutter, yes, that's correct.
Okay, Schultze-Lutter, doctor in philosophy. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Psychotherapy, Medical Faculty, Heinrich Heine University, Düsseldorf, in German. Yeah, and yeah, Frauke has, besides in this university, she's also worked in other universities. Yeah. And yeah, and has now, I think currently Frauke's focus on research is related to the early stages of psychosis. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I hope we will enjoy this lecture. And yes, thank you very much, Frauke, for spending your time with us today. And then she will also share another lecture on Thursday. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, on Thursday, on the 3rd. Oh no, tomorrow, I think.
Tomorrow, yes.
Tomorrow, yep. So everyone who join now, you can also join again tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, Frauke, and for those who students or other participants who wants to then asking question, please you can write down in chat. You can also, if you feeling that my English is not so good, even though I understand what she's sharing about, but maybe you feeling confident, yeah, to write down in English, you can write down in Bahasa and then we can translate it. Okay, Frauke, time is yours. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thanks all of you for participating in this afternoon to a rather general course on the determinants of mental health and its prevalence and burden, and that will link and introduce our tomorrow's topic, where it's mainly about treatment rates and reasons why oftentimes mental illness might not be treated.
Mental health.
Excuse me, Frauke, can everyone just mute the audio? Yeah, some of you still unmute. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So health and mental health, by the definition of, health and mental health, by the definition of the World Health Organization is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This, of course, is a very, very strict definition, which might render people ill health, even if they wouldn't consider themselves really ill. These concepts include subjective well-being, perceived self-efficacy, so how well you can cope with stressors, autonomy, that you are self-reliant, competence, intergenerational dependence, and the recognition of the ability to realize one's intellectual and emotional resources. So with these three parts, with a perceived self-efficacy, autonomy, and competence, we are also within the range of the so-called resilience. So how well someone can cope with bad situations, troubles in general. However, while this seems quite a significant and easy, and someone should mute his or her.
Anissa Rahman, can you mute? Okay.
Thank you. So while this seems to be like a very easy definition, in fact, even if we only look at the writings of the World Health Organization, things are not that easy. For example, in some of their definitions, mental health seems to be a feature of resilience. When they write, mostly protective factors are identical to features of positive mental health, or mental health is a fundamental element of the resilience. In other writings then, resilience seems to be a feature of mental health, which is then equaled with well-being. For example, when they write, mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And then in other examples as well, resilience is a personal protective factor that leads to mental health. Such protection facilitates resistance or resilience to disease and minimizes and delays the emergence of disability and promotes more rapid recovery from illness. Or when they say that resilience is a capacity to cope with adversity, to avoid breakdown when confronted with stressors, or that they modify a person's response to an environmental hazard so that the outcome is not always detrimental. So, in fact, what is mental health then? Is it the result of resilience? Is resilience a part of mental health? Is mental health the same as well-being? So let's have a look then at the concepts of resilience and well-being to see whether they might help us to better understand what actually mental health might be like. So when we first look at resilience, there are two main perspectives on them. One that's slightly a more older one is a trait-oriented perspective, where resilience is like an inborn ability, something like a mental immunity that from the very makeup of a person make the person fit or with little resilience, less fit to deal with negative events in their lives. Generally, in this trait-oriented perspective, resilience was treated a little bit like a personality trait that could be assessed with self-report questionnaires or interviews, and wouldn't recognize any kind of socio-ecological factors. So that would be like you have it or you don't have it, or you only have it to a certain degree, but would in this perspective be considered to hardly change throughout life. And then there is the process-oriented perspective that looks at resilience as an allostasis, that is like an interactive process between the person and the environment, where the person tries to get a good balance with the stressors in its environment. In this perspective, resilience would not be visible in every situation, because if there is no stressor, there would be no need to show resilience. So it would only be showing when there are stressors or adverse experiences to which the person would have to react. And in this situation, from the process-oriented perspective, one would see whether someone is resilient or to what degree someone is resilient. This perspective also includes like two types of promotive factors. So there's one that comes with a person, and there's another one that comes with the environment. So even if someone, let's say, has little resilience itself, when they have a good protective environment or a resilient environment, they might be able to well cope with stressors. While someone with a good resilience, but poor protective factors in the environment might not cope better. So here that's process-oriented perspective is rather an interplay of the environment and the person. So key themes in the definition of resilience are then with different definitions of resilience as the process of overcoming difficulties. In one of the main proponents of researchers of resilience, Professor Rutter, that would be not even to overcome difficulties, but resilience would show in that you are even better after you have coped with some adversities. So to becoming more successful or functioning even better than before when having been faced with difficulty, adversity, or trauma. In the viewpoint of the American Psychological Association, resilience would just require you to adjust or adapt to a new difficult situation. So it would not require you to be better to be considered resilient. So this is also within the description that it's a full recovery. So this would also allow not to adjust immediately, but it would allow for a time of trouble or non-well-being, mental problems, but you would be considered to be resilient if you can bounce back from that and finally adjust. In other definitions, and this one is more like as a trait-like perspective of Marston, resilience is a form of mental immunity. So here difficulties and problems wouldn't affect your mental health. And within the same perspective, or a kind of in-between perspective between the trait-like and the process-oriented definition of resilience, it is by Davidoff. It's a universal but difficult to quantify personal strengths grounded in positive experiences and support. So here plays in that someone in fact needs some support in developing resilience, which then becomes a trait-like asset. So this would be rather in line, I like, with other personality traits that you would develop over childhood, adolescence, and then once you are more mature, that would become more or less a part of your personal characteristic. So resilience factors then have been described on very different domains. On the affective domain, within the environmental factors or resources would be a positive school environment, a good neighborhood cohesion. That means that you feel well within your neighborhood, you're well integrated, you're not singled out, possibly because you're a member of a minority. So to live in a community where you feel people mean well and if needed might support you. And then in terms of the person, affective assets would be good emotion regulation skills and a positive affectivity. That means like that you're rather an optimistic person, someone who has, even in poor times, has a perspective that of seeing good things in its surrounding. And then in terms of coping strategies, again, the environmental factors, this is the availability of community support programs and mental health care. That certainly differs from country to country and has more to do with politics in the first hand than with the community itself. Quite nice examples of such programs and healthcare is, you might have heard of it, the Australian Headspace initiative, where they have, especially for adolescents and younger adults, they have like walk-in programs where someone can just walk in without having an appointment and say, well, I'm not feeling well, and talk about it and have like a very low threshold assessment to sometimes just talking about it once and being affirmed that it's not a severe problem might be enough. At other times, they might go on to other services and to more support. So things like that to be available at a community level, that would be regarded as a resource in terms of coping strategies and a resilience factor in the environment. In terms of the person, such coping strategies, of course, might be perceived competence and empowerment, that people have a good ability to manage stress, good problem-solving skills, good social skills, which includes that they also make good use of available resources. So in some respect, this includes also like a mental health literacy in the meaning that you know where to go to and where to get help for certain things when you have mental problems. So that's part of mental health literacy as well. Then in terms of more intrapersonal factors, there is a positive attribution style with a more internal locus of control and a good self-efficacy, so that you feel that you are the master of your life and that it's not only completely controlled by other persons, and a realistic perception of the future. And in terms of personality, that's this kind of stable picture of your identity, that you have a good idea of who you are, how you function, and what you want. A positive temperament that closely links here to the positive affectivity, so with a good, optimistic, friendly nature. And of course, a good, stable, and personality with personality traits showing different abilities in different situations. And another factor that comes in as an intrapersonal factor is also religiosity or spirituality, that might help you to cover or cope with negative events, to not get too depressed and helpless over it, to give life sense. It can help you to make a sense of negative events in terms of this might just be a trial or someone else is knowing why that happens. So it places negative events in a greater scheme that might not be as bad as the situation you're in now. And then, of course, cognition, good cognitive skills, and a good intelligence, of course, helps with coping with adverse events. And then again, on the biological level, this is good natural resources, so that you're, for example, not living in a region where there is great hunger or war, or where natural disaster has led to starvation. And this also includes a good infrastructure that, of course, also links here to the availability of community and support programs. But it also goes that you have the possibility to easily go where support is, so that you don't have, let's say, to walk 2 days through a jungle, for example, because there is no road. And in terms of the intrapersonal, there comes then neurophysiology and genetic predispositions. That, of course, gives each of us a certain range of what is possible in terms of physical activities, as well as in terms of mental activities. For example, even with the best support, someone who is by its genes rather in the lower range of cognitive abilities, you can bring him to his or her maximum, but he will never be a genius. Or the same would be if, for example, if I could have trained to become a runner or a sprinter as much as I could, I would have never managed to bring myself to be fast enough to, for example, join the Olympics. So this is like, the biology is what gives you like the frame for the person of what actually is possible under the best or the worst circumstances. So with that, current models of resilience and its influence on the outcome, hopefully the outcome would always be well-being and mental health, and the interplay of risk and promotive factors is once there's a compensatory models, that means that promotive and risk factors rather do not directly act together, but they kind of sum up on the outcomes, so that if there's more promotive factors, outcome will be good. If there's more risk factors, outcome would be worse. So a very simple model of addition and subtraction. And then there is a protective model that promotive factors reduce negative effects of risk factors. So here they directly interact with risk factors, but only once risk factors are there. And then there is a third model, which is the most modern one, and that is the so-called inoculation model. And here, certain risk factors are needed to develop promotive factors. So in a way, you have to learn through life to deal with stressors, with negative events. And the inoculation model assumes that you develop a good resilience if there are sufficient negative events, but not too much to kind of lead to a breakdown. So here it's a kind of balance between these factors. So in case of this model, of the inoculation model, for example, an overprotective environment would lead to little resilience, and in the end, once the overprotective environment is gone for whatever reasons, because someone has grown up and has now to stand on his or her own feet, would lead to likely poor outcome if certain risk factors occur. So this is like a balance model where that assumes that there is like a good balance between good and bad that leads you to learn resilience in a safe environment. So this is certainly a very process-oriented model, and quite certainly a model that we can only support from what we've seen in child and adolescent psychiatry, where in fact in recent years a lot of children or adolescents come in that have problems because they have never learned to deal with problems themselves, and then reach a situation where the parents can't protect them from everything at all. So this is certainly something that we have seen over the last 20 years, increasingly, that there hadn't been sufficient risk factors or self-responsibilities, for example, in the life of these persons. So before we come to subjective well-being, are there questions to this resilience models?
Are there any questions regarding the resilience model? Maybe not yet, Frauke. Okay.
Then well-being. Well-being, just like resilience, doesn't come with one definition, but with several kind of definitions. And I would like to present you like the three most frequent one. And certainly the one is from Diner, who had introduced this term. And for him, subjective well-being is a kind of hedonia, the ability to experience happiness. And for him, well-being was a pleasure attainment and pain avoidance, which would consist of two elements. The one is a cognitive element that deals with, refers to how someone judges his life, how satisfactory someone is with life. That would be measured with questionnaires, for example, on life satisfaction in different domains, simple questionnaires. And then there is an affective component that is characterized by the balance between positive and negative emotion, and an affective well-being would then be there if you have more positive relative to negative emotions. And then there is the conceptualization of Ruth, who has defined a psychological well-being that has several different domains, like an environmental mastery, that one has a sense that they are fit to deal with things in the environment, that people feel that they control their living situations, that they feel that they have the ability to shape their personal environments, so that they can create and for themselves an environment in which they feel well. Of course, for that you also need a sense of autonomy, that you feel that you are independent, self-determined, that you can choose your own way, and that you evaluate yourself rather by personal standards than by social pressure. So this is what it calls autonomy, that you don't only react and feel and shape your life as, for example, your larger society expects you, but that you can that you feel free enough and independent enough to make your own choices. That, of course, might sometimes counteract with the positive relations with others, especially if your own choices are in a way that is not well received by your environment. And positive relationship with others is that you have warm, satisfying, trusting relationships, where you are concerned about the welfare of others and they are concerned about your welfare, with a good empathy, and that someone understands the taking and giving of human relationships. So this is in fact on the personal side, that's good social skills and good social cognition. And on the other side, on the environmental side, would be that you are surrounded by persons who also share this good social skills and empathy, and to which you have made a good and loving contact. Then on the domain of self-acceptance, that is that you possess a positive attitude towards yourself, that you like yourself, that you know yourself well, which includes that you also know your weaknesses, and that you have a good link to what had happened to your life, which of course also again links here to autonomy and environmental mastery, that you feel that what happened to you has been your choice, that you have done well, or that you have generally done the best what was possible in this situation. So a positive feeling about the past life with little bitterness and little regrets. And then in terms of the future, that is a sense that you have a goal in your life, that you feel that there is a meaning to your life, that your life has a purpose, and that you have aims that you strive for, and things in life that you want to achieve. And here certainly comes also in like spirituality that might give also your life a greater meaning. And then personal growth, that you have, that people have the feeling that they can continuously develop their life, that there is no stagnation, that there's new experience, that there is ways to improve oneself. Certainly this also links to the autonomy. For example, one of these continued development could be to become more and more independent. So these are the aspects of the so-called psychological well-being. And this is also quite similar to another model by Seligman that you will also find quite frequently in the literature, and that's the so-called PERMA model, from positive emotions, engagement, relations, meaning, and accomplishment. So that's where this abbreviation comes from. And this is actually quite similar to Ruff's model, especially here with the relationships that is almost identical to the positive relations with others. The self-acceptance of Ruff is quite similar to the meaning in Seligman's model, and the purpose in life is quite similar to Seligman's engagement. This personal growth and environmental mastery, however, they somehow fell together in the Seligman's model of accomplishment. This is that feeling of being capable to do daily activity and have a sense of achievement, so that you can do things, that you can well cope with things. And of course, to that belongs also that you are in charge of how you live and how your environment is, at least to a realistic degree. The self-autonomy, that's a dimension that is not reflected in Seligman's PERMA model. Rather, he has taken from Diner's subjective well-being another dimension of positive emotions, and that is that you feel happy, that you see the good things. So this would be the affective well-being or would reflect the effective well-being of diners' subjective well-being model. So quite some similarities, some differences, and certainly a great deal that I think, especially in psychology, has to be done to come up with a more general and more overall accepted model. So quite some research, I think, is still needed to get a good and globally accepted version of well-being and how it is measured. So when we look then at the definitions of resilience and psychological well-being, including the affective, subjective well-being in terms of this positive relationship with others, then we see that there is again a huge overlap that kind of explains, while in the literature there is so much confusion about the relationship of resilience and well-being and how they relate to each other. So, but generally, at least with this subjective well-being, where we have a little bit lesser overlap with the resilience assessments, we can say that their well-being is like a state that is accumulated when there is a good balance between the challenges on various dimensions: physical, psychological, cognitive, social, or economic, and when the challenges are balanced by the resources and assets, so by the resilience, again, on the same dimensions. So if that holds a good balance, then we can assume that someone feels well. And to bring that all together in a easy model or not so easy model, if we look at then again, so we'll come back to our initial question, and that is, where can we place mental health? Then we see that we can kind of define three main dimensions, and that's for one, that's the person with its risk factors and its assets, its the environment with its resources and its risk factors, and it is the person outcome or the state in which someone is in. And this outcome can be kind of alternatively defined either by mental health, by psychological, or by subjective well-being. And in fact, when we look at the different models, then these all are kind of have an interplay, play together, because if you feel well, we have seen that is also one of the assets. If you feel well, you are more positive. If you generally lift up with feeling well, you will develop a more positive temperament, which is an asset in a person. So but then also if you have sufficient well-being, mental health, you might have a higher resilience to risk factors, especially if you have developed a lot of assets. So all of this comes together in a complex interplay to say, well, this is an outcome that a person had, but the outcome, of course, reflects also on the resilience factor. Someone, for example, who is positive, who has a good self-accepted, good purpose in life, positive relationship with others, will have more resources, for example, in terms of more peer support, because he or she will be better linked with his peers, will be better accepted, possibly will be also better accepted within the family if you're not known to be like the permanent troublemaker. Will go better on in school, for example, with teachers, so will have a higher likelihood also when as a child or an adolescent to have an adult who supports them. So this is, for example, how this outcome also reflects back also on the environment and how this might shape it. So quite a complicated composition of risk factors and resources or assets that play together and are again also influenced by the various outcomes, of which mental health is one. And that could be defined then if you also look at psychological well-being and subjective well-being separately in terms of a good subjective health as no mental disorder, or at least no caseness. That depends on how you would measure it. So, and in fact, when we see this complicated model with all these many factors that are influential on the various levels, and for sure this might not even be a comprehensive. There might be other factors that are also playing in. And if we look at one of the mental disorders, and one of the most severe ones, psychosis, then you can see that even with disorders, these etiological models, how it comes to, for example, the outcome of psychosis is not less complicated. So in fact, in most etiological models of current mental disorders, you have this, or you find this interplay of various, on various levels. Here, for example, with psychosis, because it's my main subject, on the genetic level, which is not just there, but also interacts with the environment in terms of gene environment interaction. As you might know, your genes is not like a fixed makeup, but environmental stressors or results can kind of switch on and off little snips in your genes, make them active or inactive. So there is, even on that level, there is a gene environment interaction. Then of course you have the environment with the various factors like bullying, neglect, being part of a discriminated minority, even things that might influence the person's development during pregnancy, like viruses or other things. Then trauma, drugs, urbanicity. So that's all things that are considered on the environmental level as something of poor intelligence, poor social skills. So this is a part of environmental risk factors, certainly not only for psychosis, but for a lot of mental disorders. And then these genes and also like environmental risk factors might already influence the brain maturation in uterus, but also further on the brain maturation from childhood to young adulthood might in fact impair with neurotransmitter regulation and then come together with persons' abilities to cope with psychosocial stressors, persons' abilities on information processing. And for example, I want to give you one example how a very basic information processing in psychotic patients can be disturbed. And for that, I have to quickly leave the presentation modus and hope that it works. Can you all see can you see the little movie?
No, it's very small. Or maybe
It's
you can play it. Can you
more quiet? Here.
Okay.
Is
Yep,
it now?
we can see it. Yep.
So if you look at this face, it turns. The nose is to the back. And now that it switched, there will be the point where suddenly you perceive the nose as being in front. Have you seen that? So it's actually a mask.
Yeah,
and there is another example with, oops. Oh, I can't see it. Can you see the rotating mask?
Oh, yep, we can see it.
And here again, you see that suddenly when it turns, the nose seems to kind of get out again, even though it should be like in the back. And that is actually something that is completely normal with healthy people, that they see or perceive these hollow faces wrongly, because in fact we should see, even if it turns, we should perceive it as it is, that the nose is turning away from us. But because we have never seen something like that in our lives, our brains kind of gives us a picture that is correct, and that is that we can't see the nose like turning inwards. Our brain always switches it automatically so that we perceive it like pointing outwards. And this, for example, is different with many people with psychosis, in that they perceive, in fact, these hollow faces more correctly. They're actually, when it turns, they don't have this switching of the nose towards pointing to you, but they correctly perceive the nose as inverted. So something in their processing in the brain kind of is over-correct, and that makes it a problem. But I think it's a very nice example that sometimes a very, very correct perception of things can be the more pathological one. And then, of course, there is next to these etiological models, more related also to brain maturation, genes, and its interaction with environment. There's a lot of psychological explanation of psychotic symptoms that generally comes from or have something like victimization, abuse, or trauma, or poor living conditions in general, as a risk factor. For example, that people who have been victimized, especially if they have been victimized by people close to them, that they develop an insecure binding ability, so they have difficulties in developing a trusting, strong relationship to others. They have generally a negative self-image that, of course, feeds interactively with the insecure binding abilities, especially if victimization, abuse happen in childhood. They might get the feeling that they don't have sufficient control over their environment, so little environmental mastery, which might lead them to paranoid expectations. That has also been shown on a biological level as a result of victimization and abuse, also in animal models, that then they have changes in cortisol and dopamine level, which leads them to have more paranoid or different processing of falsely salient stimuli, and that can then lead to paranoid ideations. Paranoid ideations might also be facilitated by deficits in social cognitions. If you can't correctly read the other person, if you don't really know what is going on in another person, you might be more prone to assume that they are not meaning well with you. We often see that with people, for example, with Asperger's syndrome, who often in interaction with negative experiences develop the general idea that other people make fun of them, or even worse. And then another thing on the cognitive level for people with psychosis was shown that they often jump to conclusions. That means that they kind of make deductive reasons too quickly, which is thought to be done to reduce tension and nervousness. And an example on how this jumping to conclusions could be measured, I will show you an example in a minute. And then for the so-called Ich-Störungen, I don't know if you have ever heard this word. Generally, even in the English literature, the German word is used. The direct translation would be ego disturbances. And that is phenomena like not being in charge of your own thoughts anymore, that people can take directly thinking out of your head. They can put like thoughts into your head, or they know what you think. So your boundaries, what makes your thinking private, are suddenly like permeable. Or the same with your actions, or your feelings, that they feel as if they are not one of the person, him or herself, but like being put into it. And that is on a psychological level is considered to also stem from external control beliefs, general external control beliefs, that leads to an impaired sense of agency. That can also be shown on neural and brain level, where they have shown that for example, in psychotic patients, there is a disturbance in the functioning of the mirror neurons. The mirror neurons are generally the part in your brain that gives you the information whether something has happened outside, or it's just a mental reflection of you. So this part, or this network in the brain, is often shown to be disturbed in psychosis, which might lead to own mental actions being perceived as having an external cause or reason. And the same is for the voice hearing, that here also dysfunctional metacognitive beliefs about control and unwanted intrusive thoughts that are not sufficiently suppressed can lead to voice hearing, and then these voices are actually in the brain displayed like real voices. So it doesn't matter if you listen to a real voice, or if a psychotic person hears a voice, the same pattern of activity in the brain, in the auditory regions, is displayed. But then just let's quickly come back to this jumping to conclusion, which is often measured by the so-called beats task. It comes in various forms. Sometimes it's like a fishing task with different fish, but I think the beat task, it's the easiest. And maybe you can write in the chat when you are sure that you know which glass that the marbles come from. And actually the task is that imagine there are two types of glasses. One is predominantly a glass with orange beads, 60 orange beads and only 40 black beads. And the other one is a predominantly black glass that contains 60 black and 40 orange beads. You can imagine them like that. And these beads are now mixed so that you can imagine it looks a little bit like that. And now the computer randomly chooses one of the two glasses, and in each step, the computer will take one of the beads out of the selected glass and display it on the screen. And each time the bead will be taken from the same glass, and following that, it would be put back into the glass again, so that once you take a bead out of the glass, it will always be 1 of 100. And I will now display the chosen beads, and you should write in the command when you think you can rather be sure to decide whether these beads have been taken predominantly from a black or predominantly from an orange glass. Should that be, is that clear, or should that be translated into Bahasa? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask the audience first.
Yeah.
Teman-teman, itu perlu diterjemahin nggak tadi pernyataan yang terkait dengan itu gambar apa tadi, gelas tadi? Atau sudah bisa dipahami? Tidak ada jawaban. Oke, nanti kalau masih minta diulang, bisa diminta ya nanti ya. Silahkan ditulis di chat. Ya. Oke, Frauke, you can go on. Maybe a bit shy.
So the first bead is orange. If someone wants to make a decision from which glass it is now, please write it. Otherwise, I'd take the next one. So the orange one is in the glass again. This is the next one that has been taken from the glass. If you think you can make a decision, write it into the chat now. I have put that back, and here again, it's a black one, it's the third bead. If someone wants to make a decision now, please write it in the chat. That is the fourth. It's again an orange one. The fifth is an orange one. Let's have a look if, no, I can't see the chat. Has anyone make a decision so far? And it's an orange one again, and again, and again. So has someone decided? Again, a black one, and an orange, and an orange, and orange. I think some of you will have made a decision by now. A black one. Orange. Black. And the last one is again an orange. So I think that likely most of you will have waited quite some time and will have looked at several of the beads before having made a decision or a guess on which glass these beads have come from. Obviously, the orange glass would be quite a good guess, but that isn't really like the main thing in this task, because as you can see with many of the psychotic patients, they will very easily, some of them even with the first bead, say, well, now I know what it is. It's the orange glass, and they will say, well, I have been given sufficient information to make that decision. Maybe you can look up how many people have made a decision, because I quickly have to answer my door.
Ya, silakan teman-teman. Mungkin ada yang mau membuat dugaan-dugaan di sini.
So how can you see that? What was the first decision that was made at what beat. Can you see that? Yeah, but you can imagine if you kind of would make a decision already like here with rather only little information, that then you're likely more prone to reach a wrong conclusion, especially if you stay with a decision and stay fixed on it no matter what comes, and if you don't take in like all the information. So these are various things with two examples that can render you with more ill health. Are there questions so far? Comments?
Yeah, there are some questions, Frauke.
Okay.
Yeah, I will read it aloud. Okay, there's the first question is related to the subjective well-being, I think. It's from Awalia. She asked, but because it is subjective, does it mean that the person only perceives well-being by themselves?
Yes. This is exactly that would be completely the decision of the person on how well he or she is feeling.
Okay.
So with that you could have let's say like someone where you would think, well, they should feel well because like they have everything that you think you might wish for, and still the person might say, well, but I feel unwell. Or the other way around, that you think, oh, that's a poor person, maybe with several handicaps, and the person might say, well, but I feel well. So that's completely a subjective state, yes.
Okay. I hope that's answer Awalia questions. Does somebody want to ask more? No? Okay, and then the next question, it's actually be posted through the YouTube that we link to our faculty's YouTube. It's from Hanan Salsabila. She has question about resilience model. The resilience model. In your own opinion, what's the best way to measure it? Since I think it's a pretty broad and abstract concept.
Yeah. In fact, in reviewing scales for resilience, I think that the existing scales are quite limited. The most frequent one is strength and competence, or a competence and strength scale, and with 40 items, which measures some aspects, but not very well. I think what would be needed in the field is actually a good comprehensive scale. And if we look at the model again, then of course, depending on what you want to measure for all of these factors that come in, of course, there are available assessments and scales. Yeah, there are good scales available, for example, for coping abilities, for emotion regulation. There are good scales to measure social skills. Healthy lifestyle, of course, would include also questions on how often you do sports, how you eat, how well you sleep. So currently, if you really wanted to assess like all of these factors, you would be confronted with a large variety of scales that would possibly include similar similar questions. So actually what I think would be needed would be being based on such a model to develop a more comprehensive scale on resilience that also includes sufficient questions on the environmental model or the environmental factors, and would also include scales that assess well-being.
Yep. Yep. So it's very huge models. Yeah, that's why we need quite a lot of skills. Or if we put one together, and then it would be contain of quite a lot of items. Then.
Yeah, but probably from something like that, if you could start with something like that to design a scale that has all the important items in, but not in redundant items.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think something like that is still needed. For example, some time ago, we have a German institute on resilience that is in Mainz. But unfortunately, they focus more on the biological factors of resilience and less on assessments and psychological factors. But the head of this also agreed that there is a need to develop a good resilience scale, a comprehensive resilience scale that actually measures all related factors.
Okay. And then the next question is from Samsul Arifin. I assume that people in underdeveloped country will struggle more to fulfill their necessity. Do the well-being model portray the same level of these conditions? Sorry, someone's talking.
I think yes, because there's again this echo. Oh, now it's gone.
Sorry, I continue the question. I haven't finished yet.
Okay.
Yeah, because I heard there is other noise here.
Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, I assume that people in underdeveloped country will struggle more to fulfill their necessity. Do the well-being model portray the same level of this condition if we compare to developed country?
That would still to be researched, as with much in mental health or in health research in general. There's far less studies in underdeveloped countries, but I do not assume per se that this is completely different. It might be culturally different. But for example, if let me think of an example. If I've been like in Germany, let's say, in terms of autonomy, I'm absolutely, for me, autonomy is that I can live on my own, that I don't have to necessarily have to fulfill a mother role, that I can choose whether I am a mother or not, what I do for work, that I can live on my own, that I can live where I want, go where I want. And that might be a different, let's say, when we look at Afghanistan, yeah, where for example a woman is not allowed to do that, where possibly in some regions women are not even allowed to go to school, where they're not allowed to go on the street by themselves. And then of course my expectation on autonomy, if I grow up in that, is a different one. Yeah. For example, just even if I would say, well, I can only go if suddenly someone would say, well, you can only go on the street when there is a man accompanying you. Yeah, my sense of autonomy would be greatly hurt. But let's say in this supposed region in Afghanistan, then if you have, for example, a brother that is very supportive and where you just have to turn to and say, well, I want to go out, please accompany me. Yeah, and he's doing that. Then you might have a very good idea of being independent within the reins of your culture. Yeah, so I think that really is very much in the balance of the expectations and what you want to do. But of course, it would be great to have something like that also studied in different cultures and compared. But the concepts themselves, they are, I think, wide enough and broad enough to accompany very, very different cultures and ideas.
Mm-hmm. Or unless if, for example, a person from the women from Afghanistan then have chance to be exposed to other culture, which then she might be able to compare and then feel that later on feel that my autonomy is not as independent as women from.
That might be, except for example that they feel like that this is my culture. So when the culture is again part of the identity, then you might even, if you have this comparison, you might still feel sufficient autonomy within your culture. Mm-hmm. So I think that then things like self-acceptance and identity formation would come into that. So it would be a very, very interesting idea. Mm-hmm. to study that in different cultures, or maybe even in different regions with different religions. For example, I think in Indonesia, there's quite a difference between like Java and Bali from the culture. Mm-hmm. Just from the religious background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this would also it's a continuing Avalia questions regarding the subjective well-being, which is very self-perception. She asks about if the person feels okay with themselves, they think they are happy and nothing wrong with them. Yeah, just quite similar to the ones that you just provide examples. And then, so how do we assess or know that someone has problem with their mental health?
With a subjective well-being, for example, they should also have a good relationships with others in terms of a good satisfaction with life, also in social life. If someone has a mental illness, likely that will be affecting the social contacts as well. And then, of course, if we have this whole interplay, and when we see, for example, that all the peers have or here with a psychological well-being, that others have withdrawn their relationship, have turned away from the patient. I think we would see that in the area of satisfaction with life as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Another question, Frauke. I have this is from Wahyu Cahyono Putra, I think. Yes, yeah. I have a question about the subjective or psychological well-being model when they are applied to explain the real condition of the person. Are both of them a state of the top conditions of a person's mental health? I mean, if there is a person which stated they are psychologically well, but in the other time they are not feeling like that state, does it mean the state of psychologically well-being can be reversed or not a stable state of a person?
Yes, the outcome here, I think all of these outcomes are, of course, state dependent. They can vary. Yeah, just like the resilience can vary, and it's not like a stable thing, and the environment is not stable. So this is something that is not just there for once, but it's a model where whenever something is changing in any of these factors, that would require to do adjustment. And so, of course, a psychological or subjective well-being, just like mental health, will respond to environmental changes. Let's say to the death of a person. Yeah, if someone in your family dies, of course, that is a stressor, and that will need adjustment. So here, a good psychological well-being, good resilience will show in a long term, in the possibility to adjust. Yeah, just like when someone close to you dies, of course you will be down. You will have a poor subjective well-being. Maybe you will even go into a state of depression. But resilience will show when in the end you are able to adjust to this change in your life, and that you then regain mental health, regain psychological well-being, regain subjective well-being. So this is something very more unstable.
Okay, Wahyu. Another question, Frauke. As you presented before, this from Alto Kusumo. As you presented before, people with psychosis using jump to conclusion to reduce their own tension. Would you elaborate more how it could happen? What tensions are they trying to reduce?
For example, to reduce the tension of not knowing what is going on. Whenever you have a fixed model in your head and you seem to know what happens, that might not be good, that might even be bad. You might even feel that you are threatened by, let's say, the CIA or whatever. But then you have a model, and it's clear, and you're sure of it. And insecurity also always raises tension. If you don't know really what is going on, if you struggle to understand, if you struggle to give meaning of what is going on. So this insecurity, just with the beats task, with the first one, and then you're insecure, then you have the second one, then it seems to be like 50-50. And you know, this not knowing, and this is even something that you can measure physiologically, that the way leading to a decision, that this is obviously associated with more signs of stress than being sure, no matter of the outcome, but being sure.
Okay. Okay, Alto. That's all the question up to now. Yeah, maybe you can continue and then maybe another question later.
Then we jump back in line. So then, now that we have more of a better idea where to place mental health, or the opposite of it, mental disorder, we can have a better look at the prevalence rates and the burden, which will then link tomorrow to treatment and mental health literacy and stigma. The global burden of disease study gives like possibly the most worldwide estimates of mental and substance use disorders. And here you can already see that prevalence rates are generally not very stable things in all literature, and it's rather, it's not so easy as you would think to find reliable literature on that. You have prevalence rates that are influenced by which type of disorder you include, how you measure it, whether you just assume prevalence rates from the help-seeking population and from that calculate what proportion of the general population that is, or whether you go into the general population to really assess the more real prevalence rate of mental disorders, to include also those who have not sought help. Of course, the latter one is the best, but it's also the most expensive one. And there you oftentimes have the problem that it's layperson, that it's not really clinicians who are doing the diagnosis. So that is everything that makes prevalence rates a little bit shaky. But as you can see here, and these are 8-year prevalence rate. This is from 1990 to 1997, and then from 1998 to 2005, and then from 2006 to 2013. And here you have prevalence rate that I would kind of summarize across 8 years with around 40% cumulating to something like 70%. That is a little bit more than you generally find in the literature, where it is assumed that every third to fourth person has a mental disorder once in their life. As you can see here, it's also the prevalence rates of different disorders vary quite significantly, and sometimes going significantly down, like here with schizophrenia, from 17% to 9% to 3.7%, and from nowadays risks, assumed risk for psychotic episode, lifetime risk, you would assume something like 3.5%. So this seems to be very, very high rates in this global burden of disease study that might also be related to the fact that they had like remission states assessed also. But overall, what gives a good reflection is that psychotic disorders are rather rare, while depressive disorders are more common, and also anxiety disorders are rather more common. If you look at the 12 months prevalence rates, and this is from a database that is freely accessible and provided by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation of the World Health Organization. The only poor thing about it is that each time you want to extract data, they change the colors. So that's a little bit annoying, and so that the colors are not really comparable, but you always have to go to this legend. And here they assume that globally there is a 12 months prevalence rate of almost 13%, with anxiety and depressive disorders being the most common by far. And that is very much in what you find with single country studies, that these two disorders are very, very frequent, while all the others, including here schizophrenia at 12 months, at less than 1%, is rather uncommon. You can also look at prevalence rates there for different countries. And here I have extracted the data for Indonesia, where you see that the assumed data for Indonesia show a little lesser prevalence of mental disorder that is mainly due to less depressive disorders and less substance use disorders. But it might also rely to some sampling issues. If you look at males versus females in Indonesia, you see that males are a little bit lower than the whole population of Indonesians, and that they have quite more anxiety compared to depressive disorders, and that substance use disorders and other mental disorders like obsessive compulsive disorders or developmental disorders are more common here, but again with low rates of schizophrenia like overall, and particularly low rates of eating disorders. And when you look at the females compared to the males in Indonesia, according to this database, they have a little bit higher load of mental disorders overall, both in terms of anxiety and in terms of depression, but they have, as commonly the case around the world, they have lesser other mental disorders like developmental disorders, for example, autism, and lesser substance use disorders. But they're similar in psychosis and in eating disorders, which it's a bit surprising because oftentimes you find more eating disorders in females as well. Then, as to the burden of mental disorders, first of all, I want to introduce you to the general categories of burden of mental disorders. And here you have as one thing the years lived with disability that are assumed with a kind of normalized lifespan that is assumed for a person. And there the years lived with disability are calculated as the years or the percentage of this assumed lifespan where someone is ill, having a disease, or having a certain disability. The same is with the years of life lost, which is more common with somatic disorders. It's less a problem with the mental disorders. That is, again, the early death in comparison to the expected lifespan of this person. And then the disabilities adjusted life years, that's like a summary of both and taking both together. So the living years visibilities as well as the assumed years lost because of early death. Quite frequently, especially in the literature on mental health, you will find this disability adjusted life years or the years lived with disability. But just for you to get a good idea what they are and what they mean. So in the WHO survey from 2010, so that's already 10 years ago, you can see when we look at the years lost earlier, then we see that expectedly mental disorders only produce quite a small share of it. It's like they contribute only 0.1% to all the years lost to premature mortality. Larger shares are communicable diseases, like we, for example, have now with corona. Corona certainly will push up worldwide this numbers for communicable diseases. Then, of course, injuries, accidents account for a large proportion, and then other diseases and again neurological disorders here, of course, playing a larger role than the mental disorders that are even a lesser role than dying, for example, from a liver problem if you're an alcoholic, so that account for substance use disorders. Already when we look at the years lived with disability, then we see that overall the non-communicable diseases have a much larger share than the communicable diseases that are often, if you, for example, with corona, if you don't die from it, you have quite a good chance to go back to health. With corona, a little bit less, but generally, and the same is for injuries if they can be well treated. So here we have a larger share of the non-communicable diseases and a huge share already of mental disorders that account together with the substance use disorders for more than 20% of all the years lived with disability. So a huge part of it in comparison to all the many other problems that are here within the non-communicable diseases. Again, this is not a fixed number, but is also varying with the perception, with the calculations. For example, here that's from a publication of the WHO that is just 4 years old, and where they give that overall the share of mental, neurological, and substance use disorders is like 31% of all years lived with disability, with depression, anxiety disorders, and alcohol use disorders having the largest share. But here with the years lived to disability, this is only summation. So of course, a disorder that is very frequent gives a large proportion or adds a lot to that in comparison with a disorder that is less frequent, but possibly even more severe. And that is how we can think of the contribution of mental disorders across lifespan. This is just for the mental disorders, neurological disorders, and substance use disorders, and where you can see that, let's say, from the time where someone is entering school to the time to old age, that of these disorders, especially in comparison with the more somatic neurological disorders, mental disorders have a great share, the major share on this. And this is already rising from the age of 1 year old. So when for example, you would already see signs of Asperger's or autism or other developmental disorders. And we can see that also in rates of disability already in children, adolescents, compared to adults. And here Indonesia would be part of the Southeast Asia region of the WHO. And here we see already rather high rates with children and adolescents. Of course, if not only disorders continue, but also continue to newly develop in person, this raises in the older group. And this is the years lost or the disability adjusted years per 1,000 population. So this would be here, if you would express it in percent, that would be like 14% of all the life years of boys in between 10 and 24 years would already be lived with disability. So if you want to think of it in terms of percentages, which might be giving a better or more grabbable estimate. And in fact, that is like a mid result for the Southeast Asia population. What is interesting in comparison, for example, here to Europe, is that there is a difference between boys and girls, males and females, in terms of disability adjusted life years in Europe. That is not as pronounced here in the southeastern region, where actually also the girls are more affected than the boys in younger age years. So I think that is something that might have to do with distribution of disorders, but as we had seen before from the prevalence rates, the distribution of disorders or the ranking of disorders wasn't so different between the world and Indonesia. But of course, this is the whole Southeast Asia region. So Indonesia is just one part of it, although by the population, certainly a huge part. And here again, we can see that the things are not stable. This is a ranking between the most main causes of years lived with a disability between 1990 and 2013. And as we can see here, of the only anxiety disorders was reduced, while all other mental disorders, despite progress in treatment and in medication and in service provision that was certainly there during this 23 years, that all other disorders, be it major depression, be it psychosis, bipolar disorders, dysthymia, or the many other mental disorders rather increased in their disability rates and kind of moved up in this unfortunate list. Major depression even being the second most cause of years lived with disability in this list. And we can see here again the main courses of disability adjusted life years. Now we come to this conglomerate again of years lost, life years lost, and life years lived with disability. And here we can see that even though mental disorders only develop frequently over the course of adolescence, mental disorders are already a leading cause of disability adjusted life years in children and adolescents, where unipolar depressive disorders is already the top cause of all 10 and 14-year-olds. Schizophrenia is already among the 10 top causes in young boys. And then in the later adolescence, it's both depression and schizophrenia and bipolar disorders that are among the top causes. So hardly anything impairs mental health more than these disorders, or impairs life more in this age group. So very, very, very significant numbers already at a young age, and especially for schizophrenia, these numbers are impressive because schizophrenia prior to the age of 18 is considered a rather rare event, and in particular schizophrenia prior to the age of 13. That is generally assumed to be something like 0.05% here of all schizophrenias. It's like just 15% of all schizophrenias are assumed to occur before the age of 18. And if you consider schizophrenia with a general lifetime incidence or prevalence of 1 or 1.5%, then 15% of that is very little, but nevertheless, it's so disabling that it has managed to reach like the top 10 already in young boys for the lifelong consequences. While depressive disorders certainly are also in these top rank levels because of their frequency. So then if we look again with this health metrics of the WHO for the disability adjusted life years in Indonesia, then compared to the global numbers of this very metric, the disabilities adjusted life years are almost the same. There is just in 2015 a difference of 0.5%, so not very much. That was mainly due to substance use disorders and schizophrenia that for whatever reason seem to have had less disability adjusted life years in Indonesia. So, but globally from these numbers, we can assume that mental disorders in Indonesia are as much a problem to the well-being of the society as they are in all other countries. That there's no, it's not, doesn't seem to be significantly worse, but also not significantly better. If we look at single disorders, then we can see here that it's in particular the frequent disorders that contribute to a lot to the disabilities adjusted life years, the major depressive disorders and the anxiety disorders, but also alcohol dependence, and here again that is globally, and psychosis and schizophrenia, despite its rarity, is already contributing a lot. Are there questions regarding the prevalence rates? That's a bit of a dry topic.
Are there any questions regarding prevalence of mental disorder or the comparison between male and female? You can open your microphone if you want. Okay, maybe not yet, but there is another question regarding the previous topic. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, this question from Anna Shirley. Her question is, I have a question about the psychosis topic before you explained before. Between environmental factor and genetic factor, which one has a bigger influence to create a psychosis?
Oh, I would say that is something that no one knows, and that is probably dependent on the person. I don't know whether it's published so far, but I think from large genetic studies where they have samples like 10,000 of persons, they have now come up with something like over 200 risk alleles. For sure, there's a publication on an older publication on 108, I think, and all of these genes only, or the frequent genes only convey very little risk, while more risk is only conveyed by very rare alleles. So that means that generally a lot of different genes have to come together. So certainly it will, and the same of course is for the various risk factors that have been identified in the for the environment as environmental risk factors. They also generally convey very little risk by themselves for psychosis. So it really will be the interplay that decides, or the individual makeup that decides whether this is someone with a, let's say, with a lot of risk alleles, or with little risk alleles, and that would require more or less environmental factors. So it's again like the balance, and would be something to that no general answer can be given, because it depends on the environment and on the makeup of the genes, if there is a higher load of one or the other within a certain person, which is why commonly or these things would be so hard to model, that a commonly interaction models between genes and environmental factor to my knowledge, have not so far been proposed as kind of predictive models.
Okay. Okay, so far there's no question regarding the prevalence. Yeah, it's actually supposed to get question from students from Kesehatan Mental Komunitas class. Now I just talking to the audience. Some of the audience are coming from classes mental health for community, community mental health, which learn lots regarding the epidemiology and the prevalence and the what is the determinants, of mental health. Yep, but they haven't had question. Oh, there is one here, Frauke.
Okay.
From Samsul Arifin, if I conclude that female has got bigger chance to get mental health problems, am I correct? If so, what kind of actions that can be taken to cope that prevalence?
I think the difference between females and males were lesser, were quite little. In at least in Indonesia, generally you don't assume a very large difference, but for some reasons, especially in girls, there seemed to be a larger impact in terms of disability on girls in Southeast Asia, which might have to do with the female role model or what is expected from them. That would be like all these complicated things would need to be more studied. Yeah. Might also have to do with if there's differences in how much trouble you take to bring a boy versus a girl into a healthcare. For example, from in India, we know that oftentimes mental health care, even by the family, is more provided for boys than for girls, because of a different perception of their value. That might be, if that's due, I don't know, or it is due a bit to the Hinduistic religion. So that, for example, might come into play in regions like Bali, for example, but differences there would have to be examined.
Well, the figure in Europe are quite different, yeah?
Different, yes.
Yep. Okay, that's all for the question, Frauke, so far.
So then once we had finished with the burden, that is more like the psychological burden, I would like to take you to have a little look at the cost of mental disorders. And here again, historically, there are different types of costs that are examined. The most easiest one might be the direct costs that refer really to costs that are used for direct treatment or direct health resources like transportation, or what community services cost, what treatment cost, what rehabilitation costs. And there are the indirect costs that refer to loss in production because someone was ill, which might also be indirect cost. For example, if a child is ill and then one of the parents decides to stay at home and to stop working to better care for a child, that would also count into the production loss because of the mobility. And then is the intangible costs, because they can't be given in, let's say, dollars or Indonesian rupiahs, and that is more like the psychological pain that is experienced. So that is a bit more like more similar to the burden of the disorder, so the disability adjusted life years, but that would also be like if you would measure subjective or psychological well-being, for example, in addition, and if you would have a measure for that and could calculate a reduction in that, that would be intangible costs as well. So the broadest perspective, of course, of costs would be to put that all together. And that would be then the suicidal level, but generally, because the intangible costs are really intangible, generally there is only calculations if you talk about costs of this direct and indirect costs. And of course, you can have like different approaches to that. That is, one is a human capital approach, and that you would have like the indirect costs, the direct and the indirect cost. So likely the most a common one in the literature. And then you have the economic growth approach that also includes not only the health care costs, so not only the direct and indirect costs, but it also the impact on the economic growth of a region. So because someone people do not work, do have to be cared for. And then another one is a value of statistical life approach that is very, very uncommon, and that measures what people would do and how much they would be willing to pay to insure themselves against risks in relation to the perceived costs that are coming from mental disorders or other disorders. So this is a more subjective overall cost, and this is like an approach that I know more from market studies, for example, where people are asked what they perceive, how much the production of my latest example is milk is costing, and how much they would be willing to pay for that, and then to kind of produce a product that kind of balances what they want to have in terms of the quality and what they're willing to pay. So from the human capital approach, so the direct and indirect costs worldwide, and this is 10 up 12 is a trillion. So unbelievable numbers. So here it's like 6 trillion US dollars that are assumed to be the cost of mental disorders in 2030. You see here that they really calculate that these costs are rising, although from the prevalence rates, there is no indication of a psychiatric or mental health or ill health epidemic. So the rates do not seem to increase very much, but nevertheless the expenses, because also of treatment gaps that we cover tomorrow, are assumed to rise from a current assumed like 2.5 trillion US dollars. If we look at the absolute costs, and these are numbers from Europe, the absolute costs, of course, are always dependent also on the prevalence rates of disorders. Then you see in the total costs that are here in blue, that you have the frequent mood disorders being on top range, followed from the neurological disorders by dementias, but in terms of the mental disorders, closely followed by the psychotic disorders, despite the huge difference in their prevalence rates, with similar assumed rates of indirect costs, but slightly higher. Oops, where is it? It's gone. Down. Slightly higher direct health care costs, where else the direct non-medical costs were not assumed, even with psychotic disorders. They might even be higher than with mood disorders. And then followed by anxiety disorders here that are also quite frequent and can also lead to significant burden, but also to significant costs. For example, if someone is then unable to work or has to reduce work, is less productive because he's simply too afraid to go out, for example. And in the direct treatment, there are even higher than the mood disorders and the psychotic disorders, likely because psychological therapy, which would be like the main therapy, of course, with anxiety disorders, is prolonged and incurs more costs than giving a slightly cheap medication, what is often done with mood disorders, although they should be given psychotherapy, and which is often done with psychotic disorders, again, although they should be given psychotherapy if you follow the guidelines. When you look at the economic growth approach, so also include what this might mean in terms of impairment of the economic growth of a region, then mental disorders are again the highest contribution to the costs of all illnesses, with 60.3 trillion US dollars assumed. That is even more than all cardiovascular diseases or diabetes, which is also a rather frequent, or even more than chronic respiratory diseases. And if you look at the suicidal costs per patient, again in US dollars, and this is from a systematic review from many countries. I couldn't find Indonesia amongst these countries, so maybe there is, at least in the English-speaking literature, still a little bit of a gap on studies from Indonesia. And what you can see here is, if you look at the cost per patient, then eating and the so-called neurotic disorders, so this would include like anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, they are frequent, and that is costly to the society, but in terms of their of the cost per patient, they are rather let's say, cheap, but it's the number of persons that, especially with the neurotic disorders, that contribute to their high overall costs, whereas psychosis are by far the most costly disorder per patients, and that is something that is in the literature quite a long time and is just supported by this overall systematic reviews of a huge number of papers. So once we talk about the prevalence of mental disorders, we should also have a look within the last minutes on the global service provision. And here we see that prevalence rates for severe disorders that are treated per 100,000 persons in mental health services, and severe mental disorders as a group are generally considered the group of psychosis, of depression and bipolar disorder. And keep in mind that the general prevalence of these disorders hardly differs from other countries or from the global numbers, but here this would be again the region in which Indonesia is included within the lower middle income countries. And what you can see here is that overall psychosis, maybe because it is such an impressive clinical picture, are amongst the best treated disorder, or that is very frequently found in mental health services, whereas, for example, the very frequent depressions, much more frequent than bipolar disorders or psychosis, have only a very limited number of represented in mental health services in this lower middle income countries, compared in particular to the high income countries where, for example, Germany would be in, where these numbers are as high as the numbers of psychosis. The bipolar disorders certainly have lower numbers also because they are less frequent. So that indicates that certainly with the wealth of a country, the number of people who receive treatment is reducing overall. That certainly has also to do with the median government mental health expenditure per capita that is highest in Europe and is extremely little in the Southeast Asian region, in which Indonesia is also a part of. So of course, if you spend less money on mental health service provision, you can treat less people in need. And this is also seen in the median number of mental health beds per 10,000 people of the population, where again Europe has a high service provision, and not only here with mental hospital beds and residential care beds, but also for psychiatric unit beds, child and adolescent and forensic beds, This is again the Southeast Asian region, and that also shows in the workforce, where again there is a huge gap in service provision. So it's I hope that many people will take up the profession of within mental health care. You see, it's absolutely needed in your region. And for that, I could also find numbers for Indonesia, which is quite comparable in terms of the mental health workforce per 10,000 in the population to the rest of the region. It's a little bit higher with 3%. And if you break down,
yeah. Sorry to interrupt. We approaching time.
Yeah. I'm almost finished.
Okay then. Yep.
I'm almost finished. And you can see that also when you break down the workforce. And here again, that's the numbers for Indonesia. And here the orange one are the psychologists. So psychologists have a little bit higher share of the overall workforce on mental health in Indonesia, but in particularly striking are the much higher number of nurses that play a role in the mental health provision in Indonesia, and which certainly should cooperate then closely with other mental health professionals like psychiatrists and psychologists. What I couldn't find, or there's no information on for Indonesia, is the existence of a dedicated authority or independent body to assess compliance with the mental health legislation, with international human rights, although Indonesia in, I think, 2014 has been given the first mental health legislation law, but so far, at least from the Mental Health Atlas of the WHO, the latest, there was either no authority reported, or there is none that really watches that these regulations are followed. So in summary, we can say that mental health, mental disorders are very complex constructs that are closely intertwined with resilience, well-being, that generally have a very complex etiology with many frequent unspecific risk and protective factors, that they globally account for something like 13% of all diseases, with no indication of a significantly rising number of mental disorders. But although they only account for 13% of all diseases, they account for 31% of the disability adjusted life years. And globally, the expenditures on mental health does not by far match the burden. And of course, in each country, one should vote for and work for mental health being given much more of a priority. And with that, I hope my translation program has not done a complete mixture, and I think we would have time for one or two quick questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frauke. You're fluent in Indonesian bahasa now. Okay. Yeah. Are there any questions? Maybe one or two questions. Yeah. I want to make a summary, but you already make a summary, so it's good. So I don't have to do that. Oke, mungkin ada pertanyaan dari teman-teman. Yeah, it's a very broad from the definition and the understanding about mental health, and then the determinants of mental health, which you covered also the biological, environmental, and person's factors, and then the age, the stressors, the sex, yeah, culture as well. Yeah, so and also the cost of mental health, yeah, which not only on economic point of view, but also other indicator as well. Yeah, and I think with the what is the daily justice life years, disability justice life years, bring the mental health become what is the focus as well.
Yeah.
That's a
because it's linked to so much burden. Yeah.
Okay, are there any question? Yep, sorry.
I will send you again the slides that you can contribute them to the participants if they want to have them.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah. One question maybe is because of you are shy or because you're tired?
Or both.
Both, yeah. Okay, Sabrina Puspa raise hand. Okay, you can unmute your microphone, Sabrina, and ask directly.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. It's such a nice explanation from you. And I just curious about your personal perspective regarding this current situation of this whole pandemic and how it's impact most of us, probably like in most various ways. And I just curious about your personal perspective in regard of the resilience. Do you have any comments on that? Thank you.
My personal perspective, of course, is very much one from a Middle Western European perspective, because that is, of course, shaped by my environment. And here I think that there is this odd imbalance about a good knowledge about mental health. We have seen that this is increasing, but this kind of differentiation between how I feel and what I know, and from what I know about others and what I kind of contribute to me. What I don't see is like an endemic. I think there are more recognized cases. It's not that there are more cases, but cases are better recognized because of rising mental health literacy and a better acceptance, and that then might look as if the numbers are rising, but the numbers are only rising in the services because the treatment gap is reducing. We see a lot about that tomorrow. I think that was what has first given this this view that there is a mental health pandemic in the late 1990s, but then with more always a closer look at truly epidemiological studies, where you had also assessed people not in mental health care. Then it was easily shown that there wasn't a rise in total numbers, but a rise in treated persons, particularly in the more high income countries where most of the research is done, and where most or more money went into mental health literacy and anti-stigma programs, so that in particular in those regions, of course, the number of treated people were rising. So I think it's fairly it's quite the same in numbers, how well people, I mean, we don't change that much, and so it's always like more or less same percentage of people who struggle more with life than others. Inequalities are still there, rising again. So that might bring some weaker people also to struggle with their psychological and subjective well-being. And we will only have to see how the whole digital world will play into that. As you had said before, when you suddenly in an area where you were living your cultures and suddenly you have internet and you see that there's all other possibilities, how this will play into mental health problems. I think for that, the digital world is too new to show that, with all the potential fears of not building up resilience when you are more or less constrained to a digital world when you are growing up. I think what that will do to the mental health of a population already, that will only show in the next 20 years.
Okay, I think time's up for now, but tomorrow you will see with Frauke again. Frauke, can you please stop share? I want to share some information regarding our public lecture. Yeah, this week we have several interesting public lecture with some interesting from some interesting people. So okay, I will share here first. So tomorrow we will have, still with Frauke, we will have a lecture about mental health problems in general, help-seeking behavior, stigma, and mental health literacy, which is continuing what we have studying now. And then we will have, I'm not familiar yet with this one. Okay, tomorrow we will also have a public lecture. Sorry, I will speak in Bahasa, Frauke. Kesiapan belajar tatap muka di PAUD ya, dari Direktur PAUD, Dirjen PAUD Pendidikan Dasar dan Menengah, dan juga ditemani oleh Dr. Nuraini Fardana, Ibu Wadik 1 kita, dan dengan dimoderatori oleh Bu Prima. Kemudian kita juga akan, ini yang dari psikologi industri organisasi ya, mungkin lebih tertarik, ini tentang technology disruption in financial industry, organizational change and development ya. Ini dari alumni kita ya, Krisiaan, dan dimoderatori oleh Mas Uco, Bang Uco ya. Kemudian kita juga akan punya ya, ini dengan Pak Galang Lufityanto dari UGM tentang perilaku manusia dari perspektif neuroscience ya. Nanti dimoderatori oleh Mas Nido yang baru pulang pendidikan masternya di bidang neuropsikologi. Kemudian ini ada lagi nanti 2 sesi ya, untuk yang ini mungkin yang S3 akan sangat mendapatkan manfaat, yang program dokter. Kuliah tamu seri psikometrika ya, analisa item politomus ya dengan pendekatan Raj. Nah, ini ada 2 sesi, nanti tanggal 3 dan tanggal 10. Kemudian satu lagi nanti tanggal 5 kita punya kedatangan ini apa namanya dari Nah, ini kuliah tamu tentang pergulatan psikologis dan sosial mereka yang terjebak dalam jaringan terorisme. Ya, ini dengan Kadensus 88 dan kemudian ada beberapa pembicara termasuk juga ada Pak Ilham dan juga ini ada juga nanti Ustadz mantan jihadis ya. Nanti dimoderatori oleh dosen muda kita Sukma Rahastri Kanti ya. Nah, itu rangkaian kuliah tamu kita sampai awal Desember nanti ya. Sekarang sudah awal Desember ya, sampai awal Desember. Silakan dimanfaatkan. Anda boleh juga mengajak teman ya untuk baik itu yang terkait dengan bidang kuliah maupun tidak ya. Nah, semoga apa yang kita berikan, kita sajikan untuk mahasiswa, untuk alumni ini bisa diterima dan menambah ini ya perspektif kita dalam berbagai hal. Ya. Demikian. Sorry Frauke, I speak a little bit in bahasa Indonesia because I
listen to it.
All of our public lectures here.
Interesting, yeah.
Yep. So I think it's already evening now. It's already dark here, and we will still continue tomorrow with Frauke and with Bu Atika Diantoro as a moderator.
Okay.
Thank you again, Frauke.
Thank you, and
all the
see you tomorrow.
Participants for your contribution and participation, and we will share the slides to you through email. So please don't forget to put your name in the link, presentation link.
Okay.
See you tomorrow, Frauke.
See you tomorrow. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye. Stay healthy for all.